Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on Ma'aseh Merkavah, the workings of the Chariot. Last week, we kind of concluded our look at chapters 1 through 11. And the theme last week was really, in a certain way, putting all the pieces together. And one of the major themes that we came up with was the idea of paradox. And I'm not going to go back into it. Everyone is welcome to go to YouTube and see the previous recordings. But paradox is running through the whole Ma'aseh Merkavah, exile and redemption, silence and speech, the destruction of the temple and the exile coming, the incredibly prophetic, high and elevated vision of the fabric of the universe. And all these paradoxes we looked at weaving their way through everything that we've discussed. So, as I said, where we're going to pick up this week is in the tractate of Chagiga. That is where almost everything about Ma'aseh Merkavah and Ma'aseh Bereshit is found in this one tractate. And especially in the second chapter is basically the most mystical maybe 5 pages of the entire Talmud. And after many discussions about Ma'aseh Merkavah, Ma'aseh Bereshit, many of these sources we've already brought, so we're not going to go back over them. But at the end of the discussion of Ma'aseh Merkavah comes one of the most famous stories in the entire Talmud. And the placement is very, very important. And that is Arba shenichnasu lePardes, 4 that went into the orchard. Pardes is really a code word for a very high mystical type of meditation. Many people say, and I'm sure rightfully so, that the word paradise comes from Pardes. That here, the 4 that went into paradise. Now, the juxtaposition here is very, very important because all the commentaries say, how did they enter into paradise? So everyone agrees it was through Ma'aseh Merkavah. This is something we've discussed many times, that Ma'aseh Merkavah is not exclusive to the first chapter of Ezekiel. And here we see that this incident occurs approximately 500 years after Ezekiel, and they are practicing the mystical meditations that would allow them to go into what we will call paradise, meaning they had reached, after years and years of practice and preparation, into this very, very high level. And it's interesting because they were a group. So obviously they were sharing ideas and information about how to do these mystical meditations. But as I said, all of the commentaries make it clear the reason it's right here in the Gemara, right next to Ma'aseh Merkavah, because this is maybe the prime example of the sages also involved with Ma'aseh Merkavah. So we are going to dedicate the first part of the class to understanding the 4 who went into the orchard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to continue. And in a certain way, we're going to change gears completely. And I want to show in great detail that the type of meditation that we're talking about, the mystical tradition in Judaism, goes all the ways back to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Ezekiel is approximately 1,200 years after the patriarchs. But we're going to see, after we go into the four who went into paradise, how far back the antecedents of Ma'aseh Merkavah go. And it's very, very important to see this whole thing in a wider context. So here's what it says. Arba shenichnasu lePardes. The four that went into paradise. Elohen, who are they? Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rebbe Akiva. So who are these four people? So Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, here it's interesting, their first names are not mentioned. Ben means the son of. So one is called the son of Azai, and the other one is called the son of Zoma. Both of their names happen to be Shimon. And one of the explanations is, why are they not called by their name? We have to understand these figures appear throughout the Gemara. They were the greatest of the great, but some conjecture that they didn't actually have what's called smicha. They didn't have official rabbanut status. And therefore, it's indicated by they're called after their father's names. Nonetheless, everyone understood that they were really the greatest of the great. Both of them were relatively young when this whole story occurs. Rebbe Akiva is in his later years. So the first two are Ben Azai and Ben Zoma. And then Acher and Rebbe Akiva. Acher in Hebrew literally means the other one, someone else. He's not named by his real name. His real name was Elisha ben Abuya. But in the entire Gemara, he's only mentioned maybe once or twice in Pirkei Avot. Every place else, he's called Acher. And we'll understand in a minute, the other one. In other words, he became a heretic, and he was pushed away by all of his colleagues, and they wouldn't even refer to him by name. He was called Acher. And Rebbe Akiva. So we continue. Amar lahem Rebbe Akiva. So Rebbe Akiva said to them, it appears that he is the leader of the group here. We know that Rebbe Akiva was the greatest of the greatest, that he was perhaps the most important link in the oral tradition from before the destruction of the temple till after. That he was the link between that the oral tradition made it and the mystical tradition made it. So Rebbe Akiva says to them, Al tamru mayim mayim. Do not say water, water. That's what he said to them. Don't say water, water. Kishatem magi'im etzel avnei shayish tahor. When you draw near to the pure marble stones, do not say water, water. And he brings a proof from 1 second. It's from Psalms 101:7, where it says, Dover shikarim lo ikon leged enai. This is God speaking in the through the psalmist. It says, those who speak untruths will not stand before my eyes. In other words, Rabbi Akiva is saying, if you say water, water, when you see the pure marble stones, you will not be able to continue with your meditation. You will not be able to continue with your soul elevation, because that would be called telling an untruth. Many, many explanations. What is Rabbi Akiva getting at? So one of them is the idea that, and we'll mention this later, in what are called the Heichalot literature, the literature of the supernal palaces. We'll mention them later. These are writings from the time of Rabbi Akiva, from right around the destruction of the Second Temple. And here were the secrets of Ma'aseh Merkavah already in a written kind of form. And there it mentions that in these heavenly palaces, there are these pure marble stones, and they are translucent, and they look like you're looking through water. But Rabbi Akiva says, don't say water, water. So one of the main things he's trying to tell them is, and this is something that we have discussed, and it could be discussed at great length, and that is the whole idea of metaphor, of symbolism, of allegory. In other words, Rabbi Akiva was saying, we are going on a pure spiritual elevation of soul. And yet it is going to seem very, very real. But if you make the mistake and you start to materialize what you're experiencing, you will not be able to stand before divinity, because you're getting caught in the physicality of the metaphor, of the symbolism, the anthropomorphic elements. You're going to get caught in that, and you will not be able to stand there. You will not be able to continue. The other explanation is, don't say mayim, mayim. Meaning, it's connected to what we just said, but here he's also hinting at paradox. In other words, when you get to this very, very high place, you are going to be confronted with paradox. And he says to them, but don't say water, water. In other words, if you say water, water, it means you're stuck in the contradiction, like a triangle. You're going to be stuck down here and not see the unity behind the paradox. And this fits in so well, and that's why I wanted to start tonight with this particular story, because that is what Rabbi Akiva is warning them, along with this idea of do not start to make physical your spiritual visions. They're not physical. And we dealt with this with the whole vision of Ezekiel, that he is explaining or describing his vision in very physical terms. And yet, everyone really understands that he is just trying to find physical, this kind of world expressions that can explain what he is experiencing. What he's experiencing, because it says over and over again, these are in visions of God. And so they're not real in a physical sense. They have an effect in this world, but the vision itself is not physical. So Rabbi Akiva is warning them, don't say water, water. And the importance of the double language of water, water is this idea of contradiction, you're going to see things that you might think that the higher you ascend spiritually, the clearer everything will get. And one of the most important teachings I learned from Rabbi Ginsburg is he said, as I started, one would think that the higher they get spiritually, the more a person is purified, the more a person is holy, that paradoxes wouldn't exist. Everything would become clear, and it would be easy to see the oneness behind everything. But Rabbi Ginsburg said that that isn't really true, because the essence of God is paradox. The difference is all paradoxes through God's eyes, as it were, are not paradoxes the way we experience them. We might say, mayim, mayim, water, water. But for God, there are no contradictions like everything. There are opposites. God created a bipolar, dualistic kind of world. So God is very aware of opposites and paradox. But from a divine point of view, everything is paradoxical. But these kind of paradoxicals all are, as it were, solved in the oneness of God. And that's why in Kabbalah, God is called Noseh Hafachim, the one who carries opposites. And the other one is Nimna HaNimnaot, the paradox of paradoxes. So Rabbi Akiva is alerting them that you might see things that are going to really challenge your concept of what you thought you might see in these higher realms, but don't get caught there. You have to go through the opposites, through the contradictions, through the paradoxes, and there you'll find the oneness of God. Okay, so what happens to them? So it says like this. Ben Azai, he's the first one mentioned. He tzitz v'met. Ben Azai looked and he died. He looked and he died. What happened? This is very, very similar, even though it doesn't mention it here. It's very similar what happened to Nadav and Avihu. When on the day that the tabernacle is inaugurated, they brought in an offering that they weren't commanded to do. And they brought incense and a coal from the altar into the Holy of Holies. And their souls were taken. Many explained that's exactly what they wanted. In other words, they had such a longing, desire to be close to God that literally their souls in this high level disattached from the body. Many people have had either full or partial experiences of their soul elevating above their body. Many people who have experienced near-death experiences report that their souls left their body and they're actually looking down on their body. And then their souls are brought back. So his didn't come back. He reached such a high place that his soul was merged with God. And the Gemara says about this, there's a verse that says, Yakar be'enei Hashem hamavta l'chasidav. Difficult or even precious in the eyes of God are the death of his righteous ones. It means difficult, but it's an acknowledgement of God that the person's intent was good. They wanted to be close to God. But of course, we're supposed to be close to God in this world while we're alive. Then it goes on. Ben Zoma, he's the second one. Hitzitz, he looked, Benifga, and he was damaged. He became mentally unstable. And about this, they also bring a verse. Devash mitzata echol dayach pen tisba'anu v'haketo. When you find honey, eat what is sufficient to you, lest you become full and you vomit it out. In other words, you have to know when to stop. Here's like you see this most delicious chocolate cake, and you start eating the chocolate cake, and it's so good, and you can't help yourself. You lose control, and you keep on eating until you get sick. So here it uses an imagery, a metaphor of eating, because here Ben Zoma, he looked at this heavenly divine vision, but he didn't know when to stop. He became fixated. And after that, the Gemara goes on, we're not going to go into it. The Gemara goes on and shows he didn't become like insane or anything, but he became, I'll use the word spacey. He became in modern terms, like a space cadet. His mind was just way up there, and he was having a hard time keeping grounded in this world. Then it comes to Acher. Acher kitzetz benitiyot. Acher cut the roots. Now here, the imagery is because they're in an orchard, four who entered into the orchard. So here they use an imagery that he cut the roots of the trees in the orchard. Okay, so this will explain, and this is a very, very important thing. There are three different versions of what did he see that he cut the roots. Cut the roots means he became a heretic. He left, he was a great sage. Obviously that he was one of these four and merited to reach such a high level spiritually. But something happened to him and he became a heretic. He left Judaism. And there's actually pages right here afterwards describing how he went off the derech, he went off the trail. And there's a whole lot of learning about it, very fascinating, but that's not part of what we want to go into right now. But I want to go over the three paradoxes that he confronted that caused him to leave. And again, there are different versions. It could have been that all three happened. But here in the Pardes, when he got to this very, very, very high place, he saw the angel who's called Metatron. He was sitting and recording in a book. And Metatron is considered in a certain way like the CEO of the angelic realms and the heavenly realms. He's like right up there at top. And he's sitting and recording. And Acher has a question. He says, I always learned that there is no sitting in this divine play. Only God, as it were, stands. Sits. Everyone else stands in respect. And he sees Metatron, and there are different versions that sometimes Metatron is called a little god. Now, he's not really a little god. He's an angel. According to tradition, he is the soul of Chanoch, who was taken prematurely, back in the story of Genesis. It said that God took his soul and he was no more. And the tradition is that his soul was transmuted into an angelic form called Metatron, just like Elijah the prophet, according to tradition, was transmuted into an angel. And that's why he can appear in all kinds of different settings. And so Acher sees him sitting and he's like, maybe there's not just one power, maybe there are two powers. Maybe, and this is what's called Gnostic philosophy, which was very popular at the time, which claimed there's, in a certain sense, two gods. Not like Zoroastrianism, which there's a god of good and a god of evil. And all the reality is the battle between these two forces. Now, these two forces are real, but we don't apply godliness as if they're two different gods. So Acher is confused. It runs against everything he saw. He's there, and he's thinking that maybe Metatron is an equal to God. Maybe there are what's called two Rashayot. There are two powers that are running the world. And it just shook him to his core. Now, of course, none of that is true. But again, Rabbi Akiva is warning them, don't say water, water. Just because Metatron is sitting and you learn differently. So we learned that they said that he had permission to sit when he's recording the merits of Israel. He didn't sit all of the time. But when he's recording the merits of Israel, he was given permission to sit. But Acher didn't know this. And the Gemara actually says that the other angels gave him lashes for sitting when the four entered into the Pardes. He should have been more aware that there could be a misunderstanding here. So that's the version number one. The second version is like this. There's a mitzvah, it was in last week's parsha, called Shiloh HaKan, of sending away the mother bird. If you are walking along the way and you see a nest with a mother bird in it, and you want to take the chicks or the eggs, you have to send away the mother bird in order to be able to take the chicks. You can't just grab them while the mother is there. It's considered somewhat cruel. I have to say this is a very mystical mitzvah. It seems like just a very simple, practical, but there's a lot of mystical ideas of the symbolism of sending away the mother bird, has to do with exile, a whole thing. Anyways, in the Torah, it's one of the only places where a reward is mentioned. And it says if someone does this mitzvah, they will be rewarded with long life. Now, the other mitzvah that also, it's rare that the Torah shows a reward, and that is honoring one's mother and father. There also, it says, when you do the mitzvah, it's in the 10 Commandments, you merit long life. So what happened? Acher is going along his way, and he sees a father telling his son, go up in the tree, there's a nest, and send away the mother bird and bring me the eggs or the chicks. So the boy climbs up the ladder or climbs up the tree, and he falls off the tree and he dies. And Acher is watching this, and I can't absorb this. How can it be? He honored his father by doing what he requested, and at the same time, he's doing the mitzvah where long life is promised. And some say that it just, I can't deal with this. I'm losing my faith. I lost my faith. How can the Torah promise this? And I just saw this, which is the absolute opposite of everything that the Torah is saying. And he went and became a heretic. The third version is there was, at this time of history, this is around the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Akiva and many of these lived through the destruction of the temple and afterwards. And there were 10 martyrs. Actually, it wasn't just one generation, it was actually over a number of generations. There was a terrible oppression from the Romans. And they killed 10 different sages at different times, even though we read this on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. We read the story of the 10 martyrs. And the way we read it, it's as if they happened like all together. But historically, that isn't exactly true. It was over a longer period of time. But 10 martyrs did die. One of the people in this period, he was a famous interpreter. He was a famous interpreter. And he was I'm just searching for his name. It'll come to me right now. It escaped me. Anyways, in those days, when they used to read the Torah publicly, they would read a certain amount, and the spoken language at that time was actually Aramaic. Hebrew was saved for holy purposes, holy texts, and people spoke Aramaic like we're speaking English now. So after a certain amount of verses, they would stop and they would translate it into the Aramaic so that people could follow and understand. Not everyone even understood Hebrew at that point, just like today. And so he was considered, had a golden tongue. And the story is that during this time of terrible oppression, the Romans cut out his tongue and they threw it on a garbage heap. And Acher witnessed this. And again, he was like, this is just too paradoxical. I can't grasp how these things happen, how God allows these things to happen. So here's 3 different stories of how he became a heretic. but they're all connected to his inability to deal with paradox. And of course, this goes back to Rabbi Akiva's warning. Don't say mayim, mayim. When you're confronted with paradoxical events, and I have to say, we are all the time we read about or we witness or in our own lives or our family or our friends, things happen that we just can't get our head around. We can't grasp them. How can these things be happening? How can there be such evil? If God is good, how does all of this happen? These types of deep existential questions, but we're a people of faith. But here we see Acher lost his faith. I'll end this part with how did he get the name Acher? So when he left, call it Judaism or Torah observance, we'll say it like that. He went to a prostitute, and the prostitute recognized him and said, "Aren't you Elisha ben Abayu?" And he wanted to convince her that he wasn't. So it was on Shabbat. So he bent down, and there were radishes growing there. And he picked out a radish from the ground as if to prove to her, if I was this great sage, Elisha, would I be breaking Shabbat? And so when she saw him do it, she said, "Oh, you must be someone acher. You must be someone else, because if you were Elisha, you wouldn't have done that." So that's how he got his name, Acher. Like I said, it actually goes on for a couple of pages about different stories about what happened to him. Very, very fascinating, but that's not what we're going to go into now. The last thing it says here is Rabbi Akiva yatsa b'shalom. Rabbi Akiva came out in peace. He came out in peace. So then a few pages later, after a whole discussion of what happened to Acher, it goes back to trying to understand, well, what was different about Rabbi Akiva? What was different? So the Gemara says like this. I see it's getting late, so I'm not going to read all of the verses, but a number of different opinions are brought. And the question, and they bring verses to try to show that, and Rashi has two opinions. One opinion is that these verses that these sages are bringing are trying to show that when all four of them went together, Rabbi Akiva knew when not to look. We saw that the first two said they glanced. The first one died. The second one glanced, and he became mentally unstable. Acher more than glanced, he became a heretic. So what was different about Rabbi Akiva? And so the first opinion, and a number of verses here, each one is trying to show that Rabbi Akiva, when he got higher and higher and higher, he knew when he was getting close to having almost like a frontal face-to-face vision of God, and he didn't look. He knew his limits. He knew the limits, and he had warned them. He had warned them. He knew when not to look. The second opinion by Rashi is, how did he not fall into the same problem of Acher? He was the one who said, don't say mayim, mayim. But what was it about him that he knew not to get caught in that kind of paradox. And this verse I will read because we've talked about this before in a couple of different contexts. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he brings the verse about when Elijah the prophet is in the Sinai desert and he's in a cave and he experiences a great powerful wind smashing mountains and breaking rocks. And he thought this was God. But it says, Lo beruach Hashem. God was not in this like incredible wind. And then it says, V'achar ruach rash. And after the wind came like an earthquake. The earth shook. And he was convinced that God must be in the earthquake. Lo berash Hashem. No, God was not in the earthquake. V'achar hara'ash eish. And then there was a fire, flaming fire all around. Lo be'esh Hashem. God was not in the fire. And then it says, V'achar eish kol d'mamad daka. But after the fire, he heard a thin, silent voice. So for those who have been following, we have discussed this many, many times in relationship to Ezekiel's vision. And it says, V'hinei Hashem over. God was in the thin, silent voice. So this is important because this thin, silent voice, we equated it with the chashmal, the silent speaking. And that the only place that this word appears in the whole Bible is in the vision of Ezekiel. And this represents the epitome of paradox. So Rabbi Akiva understood that God is in the paradox. And so he didn't allow himself to get caught up in these kind of paradoxes that from below, from a human point of view, like Acher, he could not deal with it. He could not understand the contradictions here. But Rabbi Akiva went out in peace. And that's basically the end of the discussion of Arba Shenichnasu le Pardes. Okay, so now we have a good amount of time left. We will not be able to do it all tonight, but we will continue next week. What I want to do now is I want to show the bigger context of the entire concept of Ma'aseh Merkavah. It has its name really from Ezekiel's vision. But the idea of mystical meditation and people reaching high levels of deep spirituality and epiphanies and Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration and prophecy, this goes way back. So we're going to trace from the beginning, and what specifically we're going to see some of the images of Ezekiel's vision in some of these incidences. So first we're going to go back to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And there are 3 verses, one for each one of the patriarchs, that shows that they were connected to deep inspiration, deep meditation. So the first one is right after God changes Avram's name to Avraham. And he, as it were, goes to visit him 3 days later and has Avram has this incredible vision of God. And then that's when the three angels appear that he thinks are three men, and he interrupts this vision. But the verse of the vision is, V'yera elav Hashem, and God appeared to Avram. V'hu yoshev be'alonei Mamre, that's the name of this place. V'hu yoshev, and he was sitting, meaning Avram, be'petach ha'ohel, at the opening of the tent, kechom hayom, like the heat of the day. And so this is interpreted as many interpretations, but again, God appears to Avram, and it's very interesting because this vision was so high, we have no idea what it was. There's no record of what happened in this vision that Avram was having of God. And it says that he was sitting at the opening of the tent. So we can interpret this that he was sitting, he was wide open because of the meditation that he was practicing. That opened him up to this vision of God. Kechom hayom, like the heat of the day. His neshama, his soul was on fire to be close to God. That was his experience. Now, technically, we don't call that Ma'aseh Merkavah, but for all practical purposes, it was Ma'aseh Merkavah. In other words, he was in an elevated state of soul where he was experiencing the intimate, immediate presence of God. He teaches Yitzchak about meditation. And of Yitzchak, it says, V'yetzei Yitzchak l'suach b'sadeh, that Yitzchak went out to converse in the fields. And this is understood that he went out to commune with God in nature. And this is a deep connection throughout Jewish history of going into nature in order to commune with God, to have a one-on-one experience of God. And the end of the verse is Lifnot Erev, towards the end of the day. According to tradition, this verse is pointing out at that point, Yitzchak initiates the afternoon prayer. So here we see the deep connection between prayer and meditation. That prayer, in essence, when approached as a meditative practice, becomes that. Then Yaakov, it says, V'yeshev Yaakov megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. And Yaakov was sitting in the awe of his father in the land of Canaan. So here he's sitting, literally sitting in meditation. Rashi says that he wanted to enter into a state of shalva, a state of inner peace. That was his meditation. He was communing with God, sitting in meditation. In the land of Canaan, Canaan comes from the word hachna'ah, which means existential humbleness. So here Yaakov is in a state of existential humbleness, trying to reach a place of inner tranquility in meditation. So I bring all three of these to show that the idea of Ma'aseh Merkavah, which we have identified or translated as a state of deep meditation. But if you remember from the beginning, we explored, because the first Mishnah of this chapter tells us that the secrets of Ma'aseh Merkavah can only be given over to one individual. You can't like have a whole class. You can't have 5 people. You can't have 3 people. You can't even have 2. Ma'aseh Bereshit, a teacher can teach 2 people at the same time. And it begins in sexual matters. There can't be more than 3. And actually that means the teacher and 2 other people. With Ma'aseh Merkava, Ma'aseh Bereshit, I said it wrong. It's not with 2 people. It's the teacher and 1 other person. Ma'aseh Merkava, though, it can be 1 other person, but that person has to be on a very, very, very high level. And the Gemara discusses how high a level. But the point is that Ma'aseh Merkava is considered a deeper level than even Ma'aseh Bereshit. And right from the beginning, we discussed, well, how could we be having this class about Ma'aseh Merkava? The Mishnah says you can only teach 1 person at a time. And there we explain, and we'll explain again here, and this is essential, is that, again, we're very fixated on this idea of the Merkava, of the vision of Ezekiel. But as we've made the point over and over again, that Ma'aseh Merkava is a very personal type of experience, and every person who reaches that level through this mystical meditation will have a different experience. There might be similarities like between Isaiah and Zechariah and Daniel and Ezekiel. There were similarities, but each one expressed it in a different way. And so Ma'aseh Merkava, beyond the symbolism, beyond the anthropomorphic metaphors, is an individual kind of mystical meditation. That is what is the secret doctrine, is how to get into that kind of meditative state that can lead to prophecy, divine inspiration, and what we call Ma'aseh Merkava. That is what is secret. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. Because it's obvious, because the first chapter of Ezekiel is read publicly on Shavuos. So if it was so secretive, first of all, it wouldn't even have been included in the Tanakh. And second of all, we certainly wouldn't be reading it publicly, and people wouldn't be commenting on it. So what they're talking about, the secret doctrine here, is the type of mystical meditation. And that can only be taught orally in an individual way. So I didn't mention before, but it's very, very important that Rashi says about the Arba Shenichnasu Pardes, the 4 that went into the orchard. So the question is, well, how did they do that? So Rashi says very simply, he said that by saying names of God. Through knowledge of the names of God, that is how they were able to enter into the Pardes. What are you telling me? Oh, okay. My wife just said she just came into the bomb shelter. We just got a warning that there may be a siren any minute. We are going to continue as if nothing is happening, other than we should say a prayer that at this very minute there are warnings around our area, and we should pray that everyone is safe. So that's what Rashi says. How did they enter paradise? He said through mystical understandings of the names of God. Now, I'm going to go back to Avram because it says explicitly in the Torah that Avram called upon the name of God. And he actually said, Kel Olam, the God of the world. Rav Ginsburg points out that if you read it literally, Kel Olam, if you wanted to say the God of the world, it would be Kel HaOlam. But it doesn't say that. It says Kel Olam. God, Avram called on the name of God, the God of the world. And Rav Ginsburg teaches, what it's teaching us is that God is the world and the world is God, not in a pantheistic way. It just means like Shema. Everything is part of the oneness of God. Kel Olam. The world is an expression of God, not the exclusive. God is much bigger than the physical universe. That's pantheism. God is equal to the universe. That's not our belief whatsoever. But nonetheless, all is God and God is all. That's how Rav Ginsburg puts it according to Chassidut. That's what Avram was revealing. But here it says he calls on the name of God. And I'm bringing this because Rashi tells us, how did the four enter into the Pardes? Through calling on the name of God in deep meditation. And this gets into so much of Kabbalah is understanding the names of God, how to understand them, how to integrate them. It was a big part of the teachings of the Arizal, what are called yichudim, of unifications through using different names of God. Even though today the idea of using God's name to enter into Pardes, or more practically to use them to try to alter nature, is not practiced anymore. That's what's called sometimes practical Kabbalah. And it was practiced to using names of God, names of angels, etc. The Arizal, the greatest of the Kabbalists, said, we don't go there anymore. That was for a different time and a different place. Now, in the time that the Mishnah, even before, was redacted, there was a group, they were actually called Chassidim. They were the first group of Chassidim, we're talking about 2,000 years ago. And it is said about them that they would sit in meditation for an hour before prayer. Their prayer became a meditation. They meditated for an hour during prayer, and then they meditated for an hour after prayer. So again, this is from 2,000 years ago. And these were not just individuals. These were men who got together and prayed together, but they practiced these meditative practices in order to turn prayer into a meditative experience. And here I'll end with this last thing, as I mentioned it before, what are called the Hechalot Rabbati. This was what was called the Hechalot literature. And some of it still exists, where the heavenly palaces, the different heavens, the different strata of angels are discussed in great length. The angels all have different names. and what their different purposes are, what the different chambers in the higher worlds are doing, who is there, what are their purposes. This is all in a type of literature around the time of the Mishnah. So, hand me the Gemara, please. I want to end this class with really an amazing Talmud. It's in Masechet Sukkah. If anyone wants to look online, it's page 28a. So it says like this, Tana Rabbanan, there's a Braita that says, Shmonim Talmidim Hayu Lo LeHillel HaZaken. Hillel, the great Hillel, had 80 main students. He really had thousands of people who considered him the Rebbe of the generation. But he had 80 top students. Shloshim mehem ru'im shetishre aleihem shechina. 30 of them were on the level that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rested upon them. Moshe Rabbeinu, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Can you imagine these 30 students? They're described as being on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Shekhinah dwelt on them. V'shloshim mehem ru'im sheta'amod lehem chama k'Yeshua ben Nun. 30 of them were on the level that they could stop the sun like Yeshua did. Are we grasping the level of these students? Esri mehem, 20 of them, Gadol shekulam, Yonatan ben Uziel. And then there were another 20, of which the greatest one was Yonatan ben Uziel. The Katan shebekulan, again, this is of the 20. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest of the greats, that through him the oral tradition was saved. When the temple was destroyed, he asked the Roman ruler, Vespasian, give me Yavna. Just let us go to Yavna. We won't bother anyone. And he agreed. And that's where the oral Torah, as we know it today, where the Judaism of today was formulated, was in Yavna, from Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he's considered the least of them. So now listen to this. So it goes on, and it says, Amru alav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They say about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shelo hiniach mikra u'mishneh gemara halachot ba'agadot. He didn't leave unmastered anything from the Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the law, and all of the stories, the Agadot. Kalim v'chamurim gezerot shavot. He knew all what I call kal v'chomer, these different logical ways of learning the text. To kufot, he knew the astronomical cycles. Ugamatriot, and he knew the whole numerical underpinnings of the whole Torah. Now listen to this. Sichat malachei sharet, he knew the speech of the ministering angels. V'sichot shedim, v'sichot dekalim. He also knew the language of the demons. And he knew the speech of palm trees. He knew the communication between trees.
Oh, good.
Mashalot kovs. One second. Mashalot. Oh, kovsin mishalot shualim. He knew the secrets of different parables that were told about launderers, people who did laundry, and parables about foxes. Davar gadol v'davar katan, a great thing and a small thing. So the Gemara asks, what is this great thing that he knew? What do they answer? Ma'aseh Merkavah. So along with everything that he knew Ma'aseh Merkavah. What's the small matter? These are the deep conversations between two of the great sages, Abaya and Rava. So I wanted to bring this to make a point that the mystical tradition in Judaism goes back all the ways to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to the elders, to the judges, to the prophets. Here we're talking about the sages of 2,000 years ago. But their traditions went way before Ezekiel, way before Isaiah. And this is an important context to understand about the mystical tradition from which Ezekiel became a prophet, learned these meditative practices, and his experience of the Merkava is what he recorded in the first chapter of Ezekiel. But here we see a greater context. We are going to end the class now, but next week I want to pick up on two particular incidences that also foreshadow in a certain way Ma'aseh Merkavah. And that is Yaakov's dream of the ladder with angels going up and coming down. And even more, something that we've mentioned many times already, but I want to get into it deeper, is the connection between the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai and Ma'aseh Merkavah.